people, welcome. It's really rainy here in Kansas City, and it's thundering, and it was hailing earlier, so my dog's going nuts. I'm just warning you. All right, so tonight we're talking about lesson 1. So let's just jump right in. What did you learn about the definition of covenant? What was that? Everyone, please put your phones on vibrate. Donna, can you fix that microphone? It's caught up on the, right here. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. I'm all hung up in the wires. If you could see my house, you'd think I was a movie star or something. Okay. What did you learn about the definition of covenant? On page 2. What does the word covenant actually mean?
A compact,
Compact made by what?
passing between pieces of flesh.
All right, that's what it means in the Old Testament in Hebrew, right? So if you didn't know, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, the New Testament was written in Greek and Aramaic. So the Old Testament means a compact made by passing through 2 pieces of flesh. What about the New Testament? What does the Greek word mean?
Contract.
It's a contract. So when you think of a contract or a compact or a disposition or a will, whatever, what do you think of?
You have like 2 sides or 2 parties.
There's 2 parties, and they're what?
It's an agreement.
It's a binding agreement. They're coming together saying we both agree that we're both gonna do what we say we're gonna do. Okay, so it's like a solemn binding agreement. All right. So we saw in Genesis 6, the very first time that covenant is used. Who was the covenant made between?
God and Noah.
God and Noah. And who started the covenant? God did, right? So, and we saw in our homework that there's covenants between God and man, and there's covenants between man and man, okay? So the very first covenant in the Bible is between God and Noah, so between God and man. There's Rascal. So God initiated the covenant with Noah. Was it just with Noah?
No, his sons and their wives.
Okay. So if you look at Genesis 6, verse 18, he says, I will establish my covenant with you, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you, and every living thing of all flesh. Right? So he really made the covenant with every living thing on earth. All right? And what was the covenant? What did he say? Actually, before we talk about that, what did God say he was going to do?
Flood the earth.
He was going to flood the earth. And why was he going to flood the earth?
The wickedness of man.
He regretted that he ever made man. It says in chapter 6, Genesis 6, verse 6, the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And so he said, I'm going to blot him out. Which makes me really sad. I wonder how he feels today. I really do. But we see that everybody was wicked, everybody was evil, and so he was going to blot them out. He regretted making them. He was going to destroy the earth with a flood. Why did he save Noah? Why did he choose Noah?
Noah was righteous.
Righteous. And I really wonder like what made Noah different. But I think that it's probably that he did what was right in God's eyes. Right? He followed after God. It says that he was blameless in his time, which makes me think that he was an upstanding citizen that did what was right in God's eyes, not necessarily what was right in everybody else's eyes. All right?
It also said that he walked with God.
Yes. So he found favor in God's eyes and grace.
I think it was he
he was trying to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
Whereas maybe the rest of the world just had gotten to the place where the right thing was whatever you wanted to do.
Right, and we see that throughout the Old Testament, that everybody kind of does what's right in their own eyes.
And that's what we're seeing in our world today.
Yes, absolutely, it is. Good point. Okay, so God floods the earth, and so Noah and his family are in the ark forever. I mean, I really want you to, it's really easy for us to read this story and be like, yeah, he took animals 2 by 2, and, you know, God flooded the earth, and then they landed, and then everybody came from them. Is everything okay? Okay.
You're just getting comments.
So, but if you really think about what they experienced when they landed the ark, if you think about just something that can maybe kind of put it in perspective, on 9/11, I mean, we were all shocked when the planes flew in to the World Trade Center, and we were all shocked when the buildings came down. But it was really 2 or 3 days later where the full impact of what had happened really hit you. Like 3,000 people are dead because of this act of violence. So I want you to think, Noah and his family, they land, they've been in this ship forever, they land, they finally, you know, get off, the water goes down far enough for them to actually get off the boat, and nothing else is alive, and everything is completely destroyed. How would you feel? How would you feel about God, and how would you feel about yourself that you were spared? How would you feel? Just tell me, just think about it. Tell me what you think. This wasn't in your homework, so you probably haven't thought about it.
I'm sure Noah felt thankful that God spared the rest of his family, because it doesn't say that they were righteous.
Right? So thankful? You think Noah was thankful? I think so.
But I think you also have to think about the fact that Noah probably influenced his children, and he had influence over them. And so I'm sure that's, you know, it was part of the whole plan that this family was saved. And we see later that they weren't so righteous after
They weren't so
all.
righteous. They had their
But I
own set of
can't
faults.
even, you know, I can't imagine what that'd be like to be saved, and be the only ones left.
I think there might be a feeling of guilt even, like, why was I saved and nobody else was?
I would think, now what?
Yeah.
Now what? There's nothing.
What's the
So
new normal?
right.
What's the new normal gonna be like? And maybe,
It's just me and my family, so now what happened?
but back to what someone said, did it stop?
It's trying to reconnect,
Trying to reconnect. Poor wireless.
It's okay, we'll just,
but it might reconnect, so I would just keep talking on it.
we're just gonna keep talking, and if it does,
And
if it
then-
does, it does, if it doesn't, it doesn't, because the people on YouTube don't know that we're on Facebook Live. So, I think one thing that's really important to notice is how important Noah was to his family, and how important a man is to their family, and their children, and even their spouses. So, anyway, I just wanted you to kind of think about how Noah would feel when he was getting off the ark, because it's in that where we come to Genesis 8:20, and on Facebook, or maybe in an email, I reminded you, I said to really focus on Genesis 8:20 and through 22. It says, "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar." So he built an altar, so he obviously thought highly of God, and thankful, and he offered burnt sacrifices. So I want you to think God is up here, and he's just destroyed the whole earth because he's grieved in his heart that he even made man. He chose to spare these 8 people. They get off the ark, and the first thing they do is build an altar and worship God, and give sacrifices, offer sacrifices to him. And I love that next verse. It says, "The Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man, For the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. And we see there that God knows the intent of our hearts. And he knows that we're evil, and he knows that we're broken, and he knows what Noah's about to go do, right? Get drunk and pass out naked, and that his sons are going to come in and see him. God knew all of that. He knows us, and there's something about inviting Christ into our brokenness and recognizing that he knows our brokenness better than we even know our brokenness ourselves. That makes you know Jesus on a whole new level. When you can recognize your own sinfulness and recognize that Jesus knows that sinfulness and still chose to die for you, and invite him into that, it just takes your relationship to a whole new level. And I just love this because it shows you that God knows your heart, and he still sees, he still loves you enough to decide, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to destroy that again. And while the earth remains seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. We're going to start over, and it's going to be, I'm never going to do that again, because he cares about us. And because Noah, his sacrifice was a soothing aroma to God. I just love it. I love it. I love it. That wasn't really part of our homework, but I just want you, the one thing that I love about studying God's word is really trying to put yourself in the shoes of the person who the story's about or who's writing it, because that it gives you kind of a new perspective, and rather than just reading a story that we've heard since we were in Sunday school and the ark and the animals, and there's really a relationship going on here between God and Noah, like a really important relationship. So what was the covenant? What did God promise to do? He promised to never destroy the earth again. And what did he give as that promise? What did he give as a sign?
Rainbow.
He gave the rainbow. And is the rainbow to remind us that God's never going to destroy the earth again? No. It's to remind who? It's a reminder to him, not that he needs one. But every time the rainbow's in the sky, it's a reminder to him. I do think it's a reminder to us. It should be a reminder to us too. But he says that he's going to put the bow in the sky. In chapter 9, verse 12, God said, "This is the sign of the covenant which I'm making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all successive generations." So forever and ever. "I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of a covenant between me and the earth. It shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth that the bow will be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh." So it's a reminder for him, which is kind of cool. So were there any conditions on this covenant? Was Noah told to do something? Did Noah have a part? Did he have to hold up any part of his agreement? No. There was no, it was just God making a promise to Noah and everybody after him that he would never destroy the earth again. All right?
What about Noah and his sons were to be fruitful and replenish the earth, but that's not.
That wasn't part of the covenant. That was a command that he gave them once they landed, but it wasn't intertwined. Like if they didn't do that, he wouldn't go ahead and break his part of the agreement
Oh,
either.
okay.
All right?
So some of the covenants that we looked at were unilateral, which is where God makes a promise to the people that they don't have something they owe to him for that.
Right.
And some are between two equal parties or men, and that's a unilateral covenant.
Yes.
We read some of each this week.
Yes. Yes. So there's a question on page 3. It says on letter E, is the mention of covenant in Genesis 6 related to the mention of covenant in Genesis 9? What do you think? What did you guys put there?
I wrote, God proves himself in covenant with Noah in chapter 6, so that when we see covenant in chapter 9 to include us, every living creature on the earth, we can trust him.
Absolutely. Anybody else have anything different?
Yes,
What you got?
yes.
The answer is yes. So the mention of covenant in Genesis
That
6.
was one that I put a question mark by because I didn't get that out of that.
Okay, so let me
Same
tell you.
here.
I'll tell you what I
And
wrote.
each time they ask the question.
In chapter 6, verse 18, he says, I will establish my covenant. In chapter 9, he said, in chapter 9, verse 8, he says, I myself do establish my covenant. So in chapter 6, he's saying he's gonna establish a covenant. He doesn't actually establish it until chapter 9 when he puts the bow in the sky, right? And says, I'm never gonna flood the earth again. So they're definitely related. It's just in 6 he's saying he's gonna do something, and in 9 he actually doesn't.
I kind of had a little bit different idea too. I put that the covenant in Genesis 6 was really a way to restore the earth. The promise given in chapter 6 to me is the beginning of the covenant in chapter 9. Because I kind of, for lack of a better way to say, tried to put myself in God's shoes there. You know, I mean, he makes his promise to Noah, knowing full well he's destroying all the evil on the earth, but he's still already got this little family to restore it. So I'm thinking, what was God thinking he might do differently, possibly, the second time around? Sort of like a redo.
Yeah, plan B.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that is at all relevant, but that was kind of how I thought about it.
Well, I don't think there's wrong answers.
Yeah.
I mean, there probably are wrong answers if you say they don't have anything to do with each other. I think that might be a wrong answer. But I think the whole point of doing study this way is to really ask God to show you, like, is this the same covenant? Is it a different covenant? Do these have to do with each other? And I do think that they absolutely are the same covenant and have to do with each other. All right?
And does it also have to do with the fact, like, well, this was in C of the first question, but it said, from the context, why do you think the covenant was made? And I said, because Noah was righteous and he and his family would be the ones to survive and continue the line that would lead to the Savior. So that's also 6 going into 9.
Yes.
And
Yes, I put to protect Noah and his sons to spare a remnant, because throughout the Old Testament, no matter what happens to the Israelites, and even though Noah is not the first Israelite, Abraham is the first Israelite, but God always spares a remnant. When they went to captivity, when the Babylonians took them into captivity, that God always spared a remnant for him that were his people. So he spared, and Noah's kind of a foreshadowing of that, Noah and his family. All right? Any other questions on day 1 that you're like, oh, that you weren't sure of? Nope. All right. So what's the next covenant that we studied about? God and Abram, okay? What did you learn from Genesis 15 about that covenant? So just a little background information that she doesn't give you in here, and I'm not sure if she will later because I can't remember, but in chapter 12 of Genesis, God calls Abram out of the land of Ur, and he tells him to pack up his family and just to go to a land that he'll show him. He doesn't really tell him where he's going, he just tells him, just go and I'll show you where you're going when you get there. So Abram packs up his family, and God promises him in chapter 12 to make him a great nation, to bless those who bless him, to curse those who curse him, to make his name great among all the families of the earth. Hi, rascal. So then they embark out, into starting to go towards the land. And Abraham had taken his nephew Lot, and their people were too many, so Lot and Abraham end up separating. Lot chooses this wonderful land, and God tells Abraham, all of this land's going to be your land. I'm going to give you all of this land, which is the land of Israel today. So chapter 15, and he tells them, your descendants are going to be as many as the stars in the sky, as many as the sand on the seashore. And Abraham's like, I don't have any descendants. Like, Sarah can't have a baby. This is a problem, right? So in chapter 15, God comes to Abram, and he establishes a covenant. And what is that covenant? What does he say? So the covenant's between who? God and Abram, okay? And what do we know about the covenant? Who initiated it?
The Lord.
God again. Abram didn't, God did, okay? And Abram, like Noah, believed that God was gonna do what he said. Verse 6, chapter 15, verse 6 is just a famous verse, really. It says, then Abram believed in the Lord and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. And that's where we get our, that you have to believe to be saved, right? Okay? So he believed in the Lord. What else? What did God promise Abram?
He promised him an heir from his own body,
Okay?
descendants so many like the stars, land to possess. I have more, should I continue?
Keep
on?
going.
Okay. Descendants will be strangers in the land, enslaved for 400 years. The nation they serve will be judged, and that Abram would die in peace at an old age.
Okay. So the main things in this covenant is that he would have a son, that he would have many descendants, and that all of his descendants would inherit this land, or inhabit this land, that the land would be theirs, okay? They would possess the land. So God tells Abram to go get some heifers, or what does he tell him to go get? He goes and gets, a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And what does he do with those? What does Abram do with those?
He cut them down the middle.
He cut them down the middle, and he kind of separated them, right? Did any of you, on page 4, number 3, did any of you guys have a concordance or a way to look that up? Because I failed as a teacher to tell you where you could find that online.
I did, I have one.
Okay, what did you find?
Karat?
Karat.
Karat? To cut, destroy, or consume. Covenant, alliance by cutting flesh and passing between.
Okay? So I put a verb meaning to cut off, to cut down, to make a covenant. Okay, so it's cutting. It has to do with cutting. So Abraham and God cut a covenant with each other. Right? You've heard of that term, haven't you? Let's cut a covenant. They cut a covenant. Someone asked me on Facebook this week, Joy did, like, what's up with the, so he cut the pieces, he separated them, and then he had this terrible dream, right? And God told him, you're going to be, your descendants are going to be strangers in a foreign land for 400 years, but when they come out, they're going to come out with many possessions, okay? And then this flaming, this smoking oven and this flaming torch passed between these two pieces of flesh. And somebody asked me, like, what is that about? So I did a whole bunch of research. And here's the deal about when we look at things like this. The Bible doesn't say what I'm about to tell you. This is what theologians believe that is symbolic of, and it makes sense once I explain it. That's so cool, it makes sense. But we're assuming, okay? So when the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, does anybody know what they did as slaves? Do you remember?
We made bricks.
They made bricks. And how did they make bricks back then?
Straw, mud, and heat.
And they put them in a kiln, okay? They put them in a smoking oven. So the smoking oven, they believe, is symbolic of this 400 years of slavery. When they came out of Egypt, how did they know God was with them?
The smoke that led them.
He was a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. So this flaming torch came after, and that's symbolic of, you're going to be slaves in Egypt for 400 years, but I'm going to rescue you and take you into the land, and you're going to have this as your possession. Pretty cool, isn't it?
That is, yeah.
I love the Bible. Okay, so, but it's, you wouldn't ever get that just from reading. But it makes sense once you hear it. Okay, what else about that covenant do we learn? I want you to take a look at Abram in chapter 15. What is Abram's, let me back up just a little bit. In chapter 14, Lot has been like kidnapped, and Abram has just gone and saved Lot, right, from these kings that had kidnapped him. And so chapter 15 starts with after these things. So after all that, after this war took place, it's really the very first war in the Bible that's talked about. After this war took place, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, "Do not fear, Abram." And I'm sure that Abram was probably a little shook up because his nephew, who he probably felt responsible for, got kidnapped, and he had to go fight for him. Because it was quite the battle if you read chapter 14. But God comes to Abram and tells him, "I'm a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great." So God's reassuring Abram. And then what does Abram say to him? In verse 2.
Well, God, what are you gonna give me since I don't have any children?
He's kind of like, okay.
What about me?
So what's Abraham's solution to this dilemma?
Slave.
I'm just gonna, the slave boy, he's gonna have to be this descendant that you're talking about because I don't have any descendants, okay? And then the Lord came to him saying, "This man will not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir." And then he took him outside and he showed him everything. But Abram asked him several times how he would know that they would possess the land, right? And it seems like this covenant that God's making with him is his answer. In verses 8, he said, "O Lord God, how may I know that I will possess it?" And then in verse 16, "Then in the fourth generation they will return here for the next," oh, that's not right. That's not right. But that's not the right verse. But it seems like when he says, how am I supposed to know that I'm going to inherit this land? This covenant and this flaming, the smoking oven and the flaming torch is God saying, well, you're not going to see it probably because for 400 years you're going to be slaves. But I'm telling you, I'm making a covenant with you that your descendants, somebody from your own body, your very own body, is going to have this land. Okay? So it's kind of God's promise to Abram that he's going to keep his word to his descendants.
I have a Bible note too that I guess that was a common thing if a couple was childless for them to adopt a slave.
Yes.
And then that slave would become
Their heir.
heir.
Yes. And so it's not like
He
it's
didn't just
just
come up with it.
Yeah, he's just, that was normal culture back then. He's like,
Yeah.
well, I guess, my family's not going to get it. Eleazar's family is going to get it. So, all right, so we talked about that. So then we skip over to Genesis 17, okay? And this is where he cuts a covenant with them. I say cuts because I want you to keep that in mind, because they cut animals in half, and in chapter 17 they're cutting flesh, right? So what is chapter 17? What's this covenant? You think it's the same covenant, or you think it's a different covenant? So we kind of fast forward. Abram's now 99 years old, right? He has a son through his maidservant, but not through Sarah. What
I
happens?
think it's the same covenant.
It's the same covenant. It's just him reminding him. I'm sure that he's like, because how old is Ishmael in this chapter?
9?
He's 13.
Oh, 13.
He's 13 when he got circumcised. So at least 13 years have passed. Okay, I don't know how much time. Well, in chapter 16 it says after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarah came to him and said, "Take Hagar." Okay, so this is probably 23 years have gone by since God cut this covenant with Abraham. So I think chapter 17 is kind of a reminder. But what's different? What's added, so to speak, in chapter 15?
That he changes his name.
He changes his name, and he also changes his wife's name. And what does he change their names to? From Abram to Abraham. And what does Abraham mean?
Father of many nations.
Father of many nations, and then from Sarai to Sarah, and what does Sarah mean? Mother of a great nation. So you see in this covenant there is a changing of names. That's something you might list on day 5 if you didn't list that. That sometimes there's name changes when God makes covenant with people. Why do you think he changed their names to that?
Maybe to signify the beginning of the start of the covenant? Maybe?
What's part of the covenant? What's part of the agreement? The binding
Well, the
agreement?
first one is that he's gonna have the heir.
He's going to have an heir, and what else? His descendants are going to be what? As many as the stars in the sky. And every nation on earth will be blessed through you. He says that in chapter 12. Okay? So he's reminding him, I'm making you a great nation. I'm making a great, great nation out of you. And I'm making a great, great nation out of Sarah, not out of Hagar. And he makes it really clear in this chapter that the promise that he's made to Abraham is through Sarah's seed, not through Hagar's seed. Now he tells Hagar, told Hagar in the wilderness that he would make his son great and that he would be a great nation. But he wasn't the one that the promise would come through. Okay? So, there is a lot. Did you guys list everything about covenant and circumcision and descendants? What'd you learn? What'd you learn from marking covenant?
I put everlasting with generations to come.
It's forever. It's forever and ever. From Abraham down to whoever's part of Abraham's seed today, right? Okay? And what did he promise them in chapter 17? In verse 8, what did he promise them?
Give him the land,
The land to who?
him and his descendants.
All of his descendants for how long?
Everlasting.
Forever. Okay? So, do you know why people are fighting over Israel today? They're still fighting over Israel because God said it belongs to the Jews. And the people who lived there before think it still belongs to them. So there's a lot of fighting going on. Okay? And what is the sign that he comes up with in this chapter?
Circumcision.
Circumcision. And what does he say about it? Who's supposed to be circumcised? Every single male in their household, whether he's bought or slave or born, every single male. And when are they supposed to be circumcised?
8 days.
8 days. Something very interesting about that is that on the 8th day after a child's born, that's when their blood clots better than it ever has before. We don't do that anymore. We do it on day 2 or whatever. But day 8 is really the very best day to do it because God knows our bodies. He created us. And so that's kind of cool. All right, what else? What if someone wasn't circumcised?
And they've broken the covenant.
They've broken the covenant. What's going to happen to them?
Cut off.
They will be cut off from the people and cut off from the covenant, cut off from the land, cut off from all the promises of being a great nation. They're cut off from the whole covenant if they're not circumcised. Why do you think, how old was how old was Abraham when he got circumcised?
13.
Abraham.
90 days.
99.
I was thinking, I know.
99. And how old was Ishmael?
13.
Do you know any 13-year-old boys? My son is 13 years old.
Oh my.
And I just can't imagine what that, no wonder he was against everyone and everyone was against him. The boy was traumatized, okay? Why do you think that God chose this as a sign of this covenant?
Well, I thought it was interesting what you said earlier about how it has to do with cutting. I didn't know all that, so then I guess this has to do with that.
Uh-huh.
The
Yes.
cutting.
It's part of that cutting and covenant, cutting the flesh. And, I mean, I could do a whole study on circumcision and cutting off of the flesh and the flesh man, the man of flesh and the spiritual man. And but that's not in here. So we're not gonna do that. But,
It sets them apart. They're different from all other men in the world if they're circumcised.
and that's where their seed comes from. And he's talking about that a seed is gonna come from Abraham, and that every nation and every family on the earth is gonna be blessed through Abraham's seed. And I really think that that's part of it is, and you know, so you might ask, well, what about women? What about women? Were they part of the covenant? What do you think?
Yeah.
Well, of course they were.
So, yeah.
But you have to realize back then, women were more property than they were, they didn't live in America in 2016. Let's just leave it at that. But I think because when a man and a woman become one flesh, that they are included in that covenant when they're a wife or whatever. So, and the women have to have the babies. They wouldn't continue on without the women. So the women are
How
definitely.
women feel like when their babies are circumcised. I mean, you know, that hurts too. It's not a physical pain that they feel, but
I could tell a story, but my son would hate me forever. But it, as a mama, it's a personal thing when that's done to your son.
it is,
So,
yeah. I
yeah,
had never really thought of that before, even the question of what about women, but now that I think about it, and what you said about a man and woman becoming one, and then they create this child.
yeah. It's all part of God's beautiful plan when
It
it's the
is.
way it's supposed to be, right? If it wasn't so messed up by mankind. What was I going to say? I was going to say one other thing. Oh, I want you to really think about Abraham, though. He's one of my favorite characters in Genesis because he just did what God told him. He packed up everything and just moved. He believed him when he said, all right, well, he said, I'm going to have a son. I'm going to have a son. He circumcised himself when he was 99. He made every man in his household be circumcised that very day. If you read it, it says, in the very same day, Abraham was circumcised and Ishmael his son. Right? So he didn't wait around. He didn't think, did I hear God right? I mean, you know, he didn't, he did what God told him. And we know that God asked him eventually to sacrifice his son. Is the only person that God's ever asked in the Bible to sacrifice their son. And in Hebrews 11, it says that Abraham believed that God would raise his son from the dead, and he followed him, and he obeyed God. And he's the only person in the Bible that's called friend of God, and I love that because I think they were friends. Not that we're not friends, but they were friends because he was so obedient, and he trusted God. He trusted that he was who he said he was, and he would do what he said he would do, even though he never got to see it. He never got. He never possessed the land. He never saw how great the people of Israel became. And I love him. I love him. I wish I was more like him. He can teach us a lot. So, all right, skipping along. Looking at the time here. Let's scooch over to Genesis 28. What did we learn from Genesis 28? Who was that covenant between? I'm skipping day 4. I'm skipping over to number. Oh, where am I? This is the bad thing about using later's notes when you're not prepared. Okay, well, let's just look at day 4. So, who is this covenant between in Genesis 21?
Abraham and Abimelech.
Abimelech. And why did they cut a covenant? What was the driving force that made them cut a covenant?
Abimelech saw that God was helping Abraham, so he wanted to be like that.
What do you think was the driving force behind that?
I thought he was scared.
Fear. Right? He was scared. He saw Abraham and how great Abraham and his people had become. And he was scared that they would attack, because that's kind of how things were done back then. If you wanted something, you just went in with force and took it. And called it yours, and it became yours. So, I think, and it definitely, Abimelech could see that God had blessed Abraham. And so really he was scared of God probably more than anything, because he knew God was with Abraham. All right? And what were the terms of the covenant?
But that had to do with the well,
Mhm.
and that the well was going to be available to Abraham and his people and their flocks.
So who dug the well? Can you tell from what you read? Abraham dug the well, but who had come and taken over the well? Abimelech's people, right? So there was kind of this argument over whose well is this well, really. So the terms of the covenant, they said, here's the deal. We're not going to harm you. You're not going to harm us. You can have the well. Abimelech told Abraham, you can have the well. And they basically said, we're not going to hurt each other, right? All right? And what did Abraham give to Abimelech? He gave him what? 7?
Female
Say
lambs.
hi, Westfall.
7 female lambs.
7 ewe lambs, 7 sheep and oxen. Why do you think he gave him that?
Well, it said it was a witness.
They set up something as a witness, didn't they? Did they set up a pillar? Oh my gosh, my dog. Get behind me, Satan. All right, let me look this up real quick. Okay,
No, this one is where Abraham planted a tree.
the tree, okay. So why do you think he gave him the animals?
I don't know, I was a little confused by that because he was the one that wanted the well back, but then he gave him something, you know, it's like,
I know.
why would you give him something? He owed you something.
Okay, so let's think about this. Does Abraham really own any land? He doesn't really own any land. So wherever he dug this well, even though it was him that dug it, he dug it on Abimelech's land.
Yeah.
So this was payment for the well, right? He's like, you take this, it's my well now, I'm not gonna hurt you, you're not gonna hurt us, and we'll call it good, all right? So then we move to Genesis 26, and who's making a covenant with who in this? Page 7, number 2.
The Lord's making covenant with Isaac.
Yes. And what does he tell him?
Tells you, do not be afraid. I will be with you, and I will bless you, and I will increase your numbers of descendants.
Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay, so God came to Abraham and told Abraham, I'm going to bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, I'm going to make you great, I'm going to make your descendants great, I'm going to make them as many as the stars from the sky, for an everlasting covenant. Okay, then he comes to Isaac, who is Abraham's son, and he says the same thing. He establishes the same covenant with Isaac, and we see later that he establishes the same covenant with who? Jacob. Who's Jacob? Isaac's son. And Jacob eventually becomes, his name is changed to Israel after he wrestles with God. So we see that God is keeping his word throughout the generations. I love that. Isn't that awesome? Like, he's just a man of his word. I wish that everybody was like that. Okay? So it's really, he doesn't really add anything to the covenant with Isaac. He's just reminding him that this covenant includes him. Right? And then in chapter 26, Isaac and who make a covenant? Abimelech, because Abimelech and Abraham, had a covenant, but that it wasn't an everlasting covenant. It was just between Abraham and Abimelech, right? So Abimelech sees Isaac prospering, sees that God is with Isaac, and it's like, oh, we better get hooked up with him too, so that. Because remember, a covenant is a solemn binding agreement, that when you make a covenant with someone, back then, it meant that you did what you were supposed to do, okay? And again, Abimelech recognized that God was with Isaac, And so he made a covenant. What did they do after they made a covenant?
They had a feast.
They made a feast, and what else?
Ate and drank.
They ate and drank, and one other thing.
Exchanged
They exchanged oaths, okay? So they gave each other their word. I'm gonna take care of you, you're gonna take care of me, we're not gonna hurt each other. Let's eat and drink on it. Let's cheers to that. Right? All right. And then we talked about that God came to Jacob and established the same covenant. And he says, the only thing different that he says in that he didn't say to Abraham and Isaac, it wasn't part of it, he just didn't say it, is that I will be with you, I will be your God. All right? So then we skip over to Genesis 31, who is this covenant between? This is one of my least favorite people in Genesis. Laban.
Laban.
So Jacob and Laban. Who's Laban and how is he related to Jacob?
Rebecca's father.
Rebecca's father. So, Rachel's. Rebecca.
I know I did this.
Isaac was married to Rebecca.
Yes.
This is Rachel's father.
Rachel's father.
Okay, so Jacob goes to work for Laban because he loves Rachel. And he works for 7 years so that he can marry her. And after 7 years, Laban gives him his daughter, and he marries her, and he wakes up and realizes it's Leah, her older sister. And he's like, I thought I was marrying Rachel. And he said, well, it's not customary to give the younger daughter. You have to take my older daughter. So he worked 7 more years for Rachel. Rachel truly was the one that he loved. And that whole story is interesting, but it has nothing to do with this. So anyway, but Jacob and Laban, so you have to, I'm just giving you that backstory because there's a little bit of friction between Jacob and Laban. I mean, I think there'd be a little bit of friction between you and someone if you felt deceived by them and worked hard and then had to work hard again for what you really thought you were getting.
But the interesting part was the deceiver had been deceived.
Yes, absolutely. He did. So, but they're making a covenant, and what did they do when they made their covenant? What are some of the steps that they went through?
In verse 45, Jacob set up a stone as a monument.
Okay, so they set up a pillar, and they made a heap of stones. Okay? And what did they do by the heap?
They eat.
They ate. They had a covenant meal, just like we talked about before. They ate and drank. And what else did they do?
They named it. They each named it.
They named that place. Right? Continue. What else did they do? In verse 53, what did they do? On page 9. Oh, maybe you guys didn't get this far,
I
but
swore by
they swore by who?
father, Isaac.
Isaac. They swore by Isaac. So they exchanged oaths, they swore to abide by this agreement, to abide by this covenant. And then what they do in verse 54? They offer sacrifices. Okay, so you see there's these different things. What was the meaning of Mizpah? They set up this heap of stones and they called it Mizpah. What does Mizpah mean?
Is it may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from one another?
Yeah, so basically they set up a heap of stones and said, God's going to be our judge. God's going to be the witness between me and you, whether we keep this covenant. God is our witness. Have you heard that said? Okay, well, this is where that comes from. Okay? And the purpose of it was a reminder. It's kind of like a sign of the covenant, really. That heap of stones and that pillar. All right? So, moving right along, in Exodus, we look at the Old Covenant, which is what we're going to call the Old Covenant. Throughout the study, we're going to call, there's the Abrahamic Covenant, which is what we just looked at between Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, that they would possess the land and be a great nation. And then there's the Old Covenant, which we could also might call the law, the 10 Commandments, okay, or the Mosaic covenant, and then there's the new covenant, which is grace, which is Jesus, okay? So, this is, we're looking at the old covenant here in Exodus 24. And basically, God just gave Moses the 10 Commandments, right? And he came down off the mountain. And what did he build? What did he do?
Altar with 12 pillars.
He built an altar, and it's very interesting, like, what happens next, isn't it? Like, what does Moses do? He kills, he makes a sacrifice, and we know from Genesis 3 that there has to be a sacrifice for sin. So he makes a sacrifice, and what does he do with the blood?
Half in basin and half sprinkled on the altar.
So he sprinkles half on the altar, and then what does he do with the other half?
Eventually, he sprinkles it or splatters it on the people.
He sprinkles it on the people, right? Half of it's on the altar, half of it. Aren't you glad that we don't live under the old covenant?
My version says he threw it.
He threw it on the people. It's like a horror flick today. Slasher movie, right? I mean, ugh.
I like sprinkle better.
I like
Makes me
sprinkle
feel a
better
lot
than
better.
through, okay?
Kind of makes me think, you know, because there was a lot of people there.
Mhm.
And how do you get it
Right,
slung out there? And it's like the loaves and the fishes, you know, God just got it out there. Everybody got blood sprinkled.
Did it
on
say how many animals that were killed? I just wonder. I don't
I
remember.
don't remember what about.
That's, I'm not even,
It
I'm in
It just
Genesis.
says
I'm not gonna
bulls.
find it there.
It just says bulls.
Just bulls, okay, well, who knows? But there had to be a lot of
A
blood.
bunch of blood.
And I don't want to spoil it for you, but that's kind of, I want you to hold on to that in your mind, because there's something in the New Testament that's really exciting. But it's later on in the study, so I'm not going to tell you. But come back next week. Don't come back next week, because we won't be doing that. Come back the week after that. Okay, so how is that, what is the covenant called in Exodus 24, 7, and 8? It's called the what? The book of the covenant and the blood of the covenant, right? It's called the book of the covenant, verse 7. It's called the blood of the covenant in verse 8. And what'd they do after they were all bloody? They ate and drank, right? They must have been Baptists. They